Hey guys, in this video we'll be learning how to use the rotary tool and how to laser engrave curved surfaces. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove the cutting bed that we usually see that's in the laser cutter. So to do that, we're going to want to open this hatch, and it's a little heavy right here. So this bed just actually slides out. So you're going to want to use two hands and slowly slide it out, and so I'm going to do that. So I removed the bed and I put it over here where it can't really harm anything or be in anybody's way. So you can always just put it on the bottom side too in case there are people working on the table. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this hatch, open the top hatch, and I'm going to put the rotary tool in. So the rotary tool is usually found on the bottom shelf of the laser cutter. So this is also just a little heavy, so I'm going to use two hands to do it. Okay, so I placed the rotary tool where the bed would be, and now we're going to mount the rotary tool. So you should see these two metal cylinders poking out right here. So those come onto the mounting brackets right here. And so we're going to actually put the rotary tool in like it's supposed to be in. So I'm doing it with one hand, so hopefully it comes in just okay. Okay. And when you're sure that it's solid in place, you should feel that there's no resistance, or there's a lot of resistance when you're trying to slide the rotary to the left or right. And if it doesn't move at all, that means you have it correctly in the mounting brackets. So now you're going to connect this cable to where it's supposed to be right here. Oops. And we're going to screw in these screws here to make sure that the connection is stable. Okay, and now we're going to actually put our material or our curved surface to inside the actual rotary tool. So you'll see that this end slides in and out, and it only slides in and out if you have the tab flicked upward like that. If you flick it downward, it keeps its place. It has a resistance to moving, but it can actually still move. So when you want to put your material inside, you're going to flick this up and slide it out and slowly in to put the material in. So we're going to be engraving this Yeti. So first what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to measure the diameter of the space that we're actually cutting. So I'm going to do that using calipers. So using these calipers, I'm going to come into the Yeti just like this and measure its diameter. So when I measure, I see that I'm at 3.7 inches, as you can see. And I'm going to want to make a note of that for the future, and you'll see why in a later part of this video. So now I'm going to actually snap this Yeti in, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to put the drinking side up into this cone area, and we're going to put the base over here on the left. So I'm going to do that right now off camera. So I put the Yeti in like so, and we want to make sure that the Yeti is in at a straight, looking pretty straight like this. And then we're also going to want to rotate the rotary to make sure that it is still in place when we move it. Not like that, as you can see, but you want it to be in place. So again, you want to make sure that the Yeti is in pretty tightly, just like this. And for bigger objects like this, it's a little harder to put in, see, as it keeps sliding out. So you're going to want to keep trying up until the Yeti does stay. Okay, and then once you're sure it's stayed, then you're ready to move on to the Illustrator portion. So by now we already have the Yeti cup strapped in and ready to laser cut. So now all we have to do is create its subsequent file and actually send it over to the laser cutter. So here I have a new document ready for me to manipulate. So first we have to think about what the width and height is going to be respectively. So we saw that the cup was laying on its side, so now all of our bearings and our orientation is flipped. So you can either deal with this by switching the orientation here, or just remembering that the width that you're working with now is now the width of the Yeti while it's laying on its side, rather than when it's standing straight up. So everything from here on out, we're now having to think about how the Yeti is now oriented. It's oriented on its side. It's no longer standing straight up on its base. So with that being said, the width, the engravable space is about 6.5 to 7 inches. I'm just going to leave it at 6.5. That seems fine with me. And the height is going to be the circumference of the total engravable surface. So we know the diameter from the calipers. We measured that to be about 3.7. So we know that the circumference is equal to pi times diameter. So 3.14 times 3.7 is roughly around probably 11 inches. So I'm going to keep it at about 11 inches. So I have a basic understanding of what I'm working with here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And now we have this artboard ready for us to do as we please. So at this point, I'm going to already assume that you've already used Illustrator enough to kind of know what's going on. So instead of just starting a design from scratch, I'm going to go ahead and describe a file that I've already made and talk about it. So if we go here, this is a GIF that I'm making right now for my dad. He knows that I use laser cutters, and he was interested to see if I could make him some sort of engraving on his Yeti. So that's actually the Yeti that we're doing right now. So there's a couple things to take note of here. If you notice, everything is actually flipped 270 degrees, and that's because that's the nature of how we actually want the engraving to go. So we want the engraving to travel along the circumference, so that when the Yeti cup is standing straight up, you can see his name is going horizontally, which is usually what most people want. So that's why this is rotated 270 degrees. Now, you could have something else that's just, I guess, engraved vertically while the Yeti cup is trying to be stood up. So there's a lot of things that you need to just take into account here. Mostly, the only weird thing about rotary engraving is that it's just weird to think about in a way, but for the most part, most of your designs will probably be rotated also at 270 degrees, depending on the way you input your curved object into the rotary. Now, if you input it with the drinking side towards the left instead of the right, then you would actually flip this only 90 degrees, but I usually put the drinking side on the right side. So just keep that in mind. And once we have a design that's ready, we're ready to send it over to the laser cutter. But before I do that, I'll actually make note of this distance here. So you'll see that there's a small gap between his name and the design. And like I said, the overall width that I have to work with here is 6.5 inches. So just always be thinking about how far you want maybe an image to be from somebody's name. So I thought that this distance was pretty adequate for the most part, and I didn't want his name to be further lower here. A lot of people make that mistake in the beginning, that they'll put somebody's name in the picture that they have associated with the cut that you're trying to go for. They'll have it spaced too far apart to where it kind of looks weird to look at. So you always want to kind of think about how much spacing that there actually is between this logo here and their name, and it's pretty fair. I want to say it's almost like 1.5 to 2 inches, which is usually plenty already. So that's something to keep in mind too. And one last thing, if you wanted to cut something on the other side of the cup or object or whatever you're trying to engrave. So if I wanted something on the other side of the Yeti, what I would want to do is I would want to make this entire thing. So we'll reference it by this top point here and make sure that this Y is at 0. Okay? And then if I had another object here, like say I wanted his name on the other side of the cup, just plain in the center. So what I would want to do is I would think about what the circumference is in total. It's about 11 inches, right? And what I would want to do is, now that I have this image, this logo here perfectly at the start of one side at 0 inches, I would want the other thing that I'm trying to engrave on the other side to be half of the circumference away. So I would want this to be probably 5.5 inches away. That way this is starting perfectly on the other side of the Yeti cup, and then you can see here that there's also some space from this side to where the Raiders are. So it's just a lot of things to keep in mind here. It's a little weird to think about, but as long as you always think about how you're oriented and how you're going to do things, then you should be okay. So just take a lot of steps to just think about what you're doing here. So when you're finally ready to send it over to the laser cutter, there's really not much you have to do in addition to this. It's just mostly a placement game. So if we go over to print and go over to setup and hit continue, if we go to preferences and the laser settings like we're so used to doing, everything is about the same as it always is, except here that you can click a different material if you want to. Most of the time people are just working with black, and with a Yeti cup like this, I find that 70% speed or power at 100% speed works pretty well. And then obviously this is a raster cut, and I'll hit apply. And so the last thing we have to do is if we scroll over to the engraving field tab, we'll see this rotary section here, and this is the only thing that we have to do. So normally the rotary is not checked off when it always should be. So if we check off the rotary like enable checkbox here, then what the laser cutter will do is it's going to actually recognize that yes, there actually is a rotary in there, and it will allow you to use the rotary mode that the laser cutter has. And so you just specify the diameter here, 3.7, and then maybe move it around just to make sure you have it. And then you just hit apply and OK. Print and print. And then when you open the UCP, you'll notice a couple things. The first thing you'll notice is this long yellow line. This explanation is kind of hard, so bear with me. This is what the UCP thinks the center of the 2D projection of the circumference is. This yellow line is also currently the part of your curved object that is closest to the laser when you put your curved object into the rotary. So in a way, this yellow line can be viewed as the starting point for the etch. What the laser cutter will do when you hit start is rotate the object clockwise to reach the top of the image you were trying to cut, or counterclockwise to reach the bottom of the image you're trying to cut, and work its way to the other side. And whether it turns counterclockwise or clockwise depends entirely on this print direction. So if it's going from top to bottom, it'll rotate clockwise, and if it's going bottom top, it'll rotate counterclockwise and go towards the other side. Because it always starts the cut by rotating the image, it's important to know where this yellow line is on your curved object. I'd recommend marking your object maybe with an expo marker where this yellow line should be. Should you ever take out your bottle or whatever it is you're cutting and discover that you may want to engrave over the bottle again, you just need to place your object on the rotary with the expo marker indicating where the yellow line should be. If you don't mark the object, you have a really terrible time trying to find the center of the circumference and accounting for that initial rotation if you're trying to go over a cut again. The easiest way to mark it is by using the focus view tool. I'll explain how it works in just a second, but you'll actually soon notice that there's now no concept of a Y direction. So if you see when I'm trying to move this picture using the relocate view, I can't move it up or down. If I try, it'll just be reset to where it just was. You can think about the Y direction instead now as angular rotation of the rotary, because that's basically what it is now. Because you no longer have this concept of a vertical placement, you'll notice that yes, indeed, the image is locked in the Y position, and you can only use the relocate view tool to move the image left or right, depending on where you want to engrave the object, like so. Oops. Sorry about that. This is why it's really important to get your image right in Illustrator before you send it over, as you can only tinker with the Y direction in Illustrator, which is again just the circumference. You'll also notice that because you don't have a concept of vertical positioning, that the focus view tool can only be on the yellow line. So if I were not using my laptop and I was actually plugged into the laser cutter, it doesn't matter where you click here with the focus view tool, it'll always line up wherever you are vertically, right in the center of this this yellow line again, and you can only move left or right. You can still use the focus view tool to line up your image correctly, but it isn't as powerful as you can only set things perfectly horizontally. You'll never really sure how the distance is vertically if the images are spaced out correctly until it's kind of too late, but you can do your best in Illustrator. You should normally have a pretty good idea regardless, and once you're sure everything is okay, just double check your settings again, make sure that this is indeed what you want, hit OK, and normally the play button would be ready to go if you were in either of these tools, so you could just hit start and the laser cutter would start. So the only things you really have to do here is just line up the image to where it actually needs to be and to mark where that yellow line is. So here we can see that I marked where the yellow line is using this black little Sharpie here, and we can see using the focus view tool that it is indeed where the yellow line is. So when I push start, the Yeti will rotate correctly to both sides of this thermos that I've already engraved, in case I want to go over these engravings again. But let's say I didn't put the cup or the thermos in correctly where that yellow line is supposed to be. See how far I'm off? This is what will happen. So when we hit start, it won't be lined up correctly, and you'll see it do a quarter turn, and it's nowhere near where it's supposed to be. That's not the start of the picture at all. So that's why you actually want to always line up with the yellow line. So that's what I mean by that. If you could, to be a nice person to anybody else using the laser cutter, you're going to want to take out the rotary and put the bed back in and send something else to the laser cutter without the rotary box checked. Rotary cutting, although it's pretty cool, isn't popular, so you could totally stump somebody on settings. They may not know what's going on, why this yellow line is always appearing unless you uncheck that box, so just remember that. Okay, that should be just about everything with rotary cutting. Hopefully I explained everything decently well to where you kind of understand what's going on. If not, please ask me questions in person through Slack or just about anywhere you can get a hold of me, and I'll do my best to explain. But thanks for watching.